Now, welcome to another Let's Talk Some Star Wars, where this time we'll be taking a look at and discussing the results of the poll that asked, which of the following best describes your interest level in Star Wars lately? And as usual, I'll also be reading and responding to some of the comments left on the poll, and so let's right away get to those results, where we'll see that 35% of voters said they don't care quite as much or get quite as excited as they used to. 31% then said their interest level is fading fast and they barely pay attention anymore. There was then 18% who said it's dead to them and they only pay attention to the downfall, which left 14% to say it's doing okay and their interest level is still pretty high, and only a final 2% who said they have never been more interested in or excited for Star Wars. And I think it goes without saying that these are some pretty sad results, that it's even a little depressing to see that the majority of those who voted in this poll have lost at least some degree of interest, and that nearly 50% fall into the bottom two options, that they either feel like Star Wars is completely dead, or that it is fading fast for them, or they just don't get excited for it anymore. And then when you consider how many out there have become completely or truly apathetic or have stopped watching or clicking on anything and everything Star Wars related for quite a while now, meaning that a poll like this won't even pop up in their feed at this point to click on the fact that they have stopped watching and think it's dead, well, that then means that the bottom choice, that dead choice, could perhaps be even higher. Though even still, I think maybe the most telling part of this whole poll just might be that only 2% have never been more excited or interested in Star Wars, that there just isn't a lot of hype in general around the franchise anymore, at least not from those who again voted in this particular poll, which obviously tends to be people who watch my channel, which then means, as I always try to point out, that these results are skewed to some degree, that another Star Wars channel could do the very same poll, the very same question, and get some very different results. However, as I also like to point out, I'm more of a, shall we say, middle-of-the-road channel. I try to point out both the good and the bad with Star Wars. I get called both a shill and a hater, so one would think that I have at least a fairly balanced audience as well, that these results come from people who don't just want either unabashed praise or merciless hate for everything Star Wars. They want something a little more nuanced, perhaps, or open-minded and fair, I guess you could say, which I try to be. Thus meaning that this could be a fairly accurate representation of the fan base on the whole, though again, we may be missing a chunk of fans who truly do not care at all anymore and haven't for a while. Either way, if these results are indeed somewhat accurate, Star Wars is certainly on the downward trend and not in a good place overall, which I think is something that anyone being honest with themselves has sort of felt as of late, but this certainly puts it into a very stark reality. This is indeed a dark time for Star Wars, and there doesn't seem to be a ton of hope that it'll get better. And to begin to possibly figure out why, let's move on to some comments, but not before once again just saying thank you to everyone who votes, comments, and or watches these or any of my videos across the two channels. Also a huge thank you to those who support the channels over on Patreon. Thank you so much for that. And now on to the comments, starting, as usual, with the top-rated one from the poll, which comes to us from Purple and Gold, who said, "Apathy is the best way to describe how I feel about Star Wars. Once a franchise that I loved dearly, watching with my family. Now I don't care at all thanks to Disney." And not that I don't understand it or that I would disagree with it, but it's really kind of sad that this is the top-rated comment. That so many fans of Star Wars are completely apathetic, that they just don't or can't care about it anymore. That it's gotten to the point for them where new things are announced or come out and they kind of hardly care or even notice at all. Though it's not just the more hardcore fans that feel this way, or don't feel anything at all, I should say. I think an equally big problem for Star Wars, if not a bigger one in some respects, is that the general audience or the more casual fan is feeling apathetic as well. I mean, I know this is only my own experience, that it is completely anecdotal, but I have noticed a massive drop in interest out of friends and family who are, again, kind of more on the casual side of the fandom. I mean, whereas a few years ago, with them, no surprise, knowing my love for Star Wars and that I have a YouTube channel devoted to it and all that, but not all that long ago, I would always either get questions from people I know who, again, aren't huge fans, asking about the current show or what's coming up next. I'd always get texts or calls from them asking random lore questions or giving me their review of the latest episode of the current running show on the day it came out. Or they'd ask about other random Star Wars things all the time. But now it's always me all but kind of begging everyone I know to say, give Andor a chance, with pretty much everyone I've convinced to watch it loving it. or having to ask them what they're thinking of the latest ongoing show or what they thought of the Ahsoka series. And a lot of them are like, what's an Ahsoka? And I'll remind them it's the latest Star Wars series on Disney Plus, and they'll be like, oh yeah, I've been meaning to watch that. Is it any good? And I'll have to be like, well, it's not the worst thing Star Wars ever. And though again, losing the hardcore fans is obviously bad for many reasons, not the least of which being for Disney, that they are the ones who tend to spend the most money on their product. But the apathy out of the general audience is almost even more telling and troubling in some ways. The people who once would almost automatically kind of tune in to something Star Wars or go see it in the theater just because it was Star Wars, and even though they weren't exactly huge fans by any stretch, they don't seem to care that much anymore. They don't just see it as the premier franchise that they must watch. The magic is gone for them, if you will. And exactly why that is, why it's no longer held in such high regard by the average person, beyond just the quality of the content itself being not as good, is probably a really, really good question for another time. But considering there were over 1,000 comments left on this poll, I should probably move on to a few more of those, starting with this one from Captain Vader, who said, "For me, I think Ahsoka killed my interest. At least with Kenobi, I had some doubts going in that it wasn't going to work. But Ahsoka is one of my favorite characters, and Dave Filoni is in charge, and it's finally continuing the story of Rebels. It has to be good. And then after I watched it twice, I moved on way too fast. It left so little of an impression on me that it made me a little sad. So while I'm not going to say Star Wars is dead, my enthusiasm for it is definitely low, but at least I'm excited for the Bad Batch and/or finales." And I think for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, Ahsoka was a sort of backbreaker for a lot of fans. I mean, here was the continuation of a beloved character story, that being Ahsoka, of course, as well as the continuation of a series that, no, not everyone watched or loved, but Rebels certainly had a lot of fans. And here was Dave Filoni, the chosen one, the Padawan of George Lucas, being given the helm to make his own show how he more or less wanted. He was writing, producing, and all of that, and instead of being great and reinvigorating the franchise at a time when it really needed it, a lot of fans just felt like it was missing the mark, that it was okay at best, if not flat out bad. And again, for a lot of fans, not all of them, but for a lot of fans, you keep getting hit with these low points from things you really, really wanted, if not almost needed to be good. As I've said before, Disney has made some good Star Wars over the years. Hell, they've made a few really good things that even I would consider some of the best we've ever got from the franchise. But they always seem to screw up what needs to be good. They screw up the things like the sequel trilogy, Kenobi, Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka. They keep screwing up things with beloved characters, and that hurts them far more than when they screw up things with brand new characters. And so, yeah, I've read a lot of comments on videos since the end of Ahsoka and during the Ahsoka series that say they just can't do this anymore. That every time they get excited for something, every time they really want something to be good and they get all worked up, it's a big letdown. And for many, there's only so many times you can get your hopes up and be disappointed before you don't want to get your hopes up anymore. Which then brings us to this comment from Black Benton, who said, "Nothing will ever take away my love for the first 6 movies, but Disney has been hit and miss, so it's hard to get excited for the next thing. Bottom line is I'm always going to give Star Wars a chance to impress me because I love what it can be." And I'm more or less in the same boat. Nothing will ever change how I feel about Star Wars overall. I'm always going to be a Star Wars fan. Nothing will stop me from loving the parts I've always loved. Nothing can diminish my memories attached to it from my childhood watching the original trilogy, or seeing the prequels for the first time, or reading some of my favorite EU books, or playing some of my favorite games, or reading my favorite comics, whatever it might be. Nothing can tarnish that. Not even the worst of Disney Star Wars can tarnish that. And it's maybe because of that, all those fond memories, because of my overall attachment to it, I guess you could say, and knowing how good it can be when it's done right, maybe that's why I'm a fool who will virtually always give it a chance, because there's few things I want more than to see Star Wars be good. I am always rooting not for them, not for Disney or whoever might be owning it or making it or whatever, but I'm always rooting for Star Wars itself and the fandom. Alright, and next up we have this comment from the Jumping Jawa, who said, "If not for the last best hope and/or Star Wars would be dead to me." And there were a lot, and I do mean a lot of comments that said something very similar to this, that listed and/or or maybe Bad Batch Season 3, or perhaps something like Tales of the Jedi as one of the only things they're looking forward to, if not the only thing they're looking forward to, and that they just don't care about the rest of it, or anything else they might announce. that they now kind of pick and choose what they watch instead of being excited for all of it or being excited for Star Wars in general. And if the few things they do care about turn out to be bad, they'll just be done with it altogether. Which again is just sort of sad. Not that I blame anyone who feels that way or that I'm upset at them or anything like that. I do totally get it, and I'd be lying if I said I was anywhere near the top option there, that these days I'm more excited than ever for Star Wars. Which is why I've been working on, as I talked about before, trying to do more creative stuff, and I've even thought about doing more EU content, or even doing something like talking about and playing some of the old games that I either loved back in the day or that I maybe missed somewhere along the way. I did miss plenty of them. There have been a lot of Star Wars games over the years. As well as maybe even talking about some other things from time to time. Things in the same wheelhouse as Star Wars, I guess. Especially in times like this when there isn't a whole lot going on with Star Wars in general, when we're kind of in a lull point. But anyway, let's now get to a few final comments before wrapping this up. And thanks to all of you who left some really great, well thought out comments on this poll. Like I said, there were over 1,000 of them, and I did take a good chunk of my morning to read through them all. And I wish I could read and kind of respond to more, but that would be a very long video if I did. But anyway, let's get to this one from Alex K, who said, I still love the old stuff, the time of George Lucas, but I am pretty pessimistic when it comes to the new stuff. There are some good movies and shows that have come out, but it's too overwhelmingly bad that it's hard to be optimistic whenever something is announced. We then move on to this one from Mad Slanted Powers, who said, I feel blessed to be able to experience all these Star Wars movies and shows that I didn't expect would ever happen. Sure, some things aren't as good as they could be, and I would love to see some of my favorite Legends books on screen, but I look forward to each episode with great anticipation. We then also have this one from Simony101, who said, Star Wars was my childhood in the 80s. I was disappointed with the prequels, The Force Awakens gave me hope, and The Last Jedi killed it. We now move on to this one from Snappy Volcano, who said, there will always be a place for Star Wars in my love for sci-fi and fantasy, but I think recently I have just needed a palate cleanser and tried some new shows and franchises. There will always be good Star Wars content to come back to and enjoy, again, even if the new stuff does not always interest me as much. We then have this one from The Holy Blade, who said, it's strange I used to get angry all the time at the decisions they were making, but now I just don't care. I find myself forgetting things like planet names and ship names. It's like this franchise is slowly leaving my mind completely. Moving on, we have this one from The Marith, who said, I watched episode 7 like 8 times in the theater when it came out. Was so hyped about the new era of Star Wars. Now I've come not to care and pretend it never happened. Next up, this one from Adenala Verd, who said, Legends needs to be continued if the franchise is to have any hope of returning to glory. Also then this one from Hugh Guyver, who said, I'm just hanging on for Andor Season 2. Anything else they do with Tony Gilroy's name attached to it will also have my attention. I'm still keeping an open mind going forward, but those are the only things in this franchise that I would actively look forward to. Also, there's this comment from Jared Locke, who said, my interest level hasn't wavered one iota since I first saw A New Hope Special Edition when I was 9 years old. I am obsessed with Star Wars. Poor content doesn't kill what's good or change how I feel about what I love. I would not be who I am today without Star Wars. If the Obi-Wan show didn't break me, and it almost did, lol, nothing will. May the Force continue to be with us all, and may the franchise that we hold so dear get the love and attention it deserves from its new creators. And finally, we have this one from Outer World Reviews, who said, I love Star Wars. I was the Star Wars kid at school. I studied filmmaking at university because of George Lucas, and I wrote my dissertation on Lucas and narrative storytelling. My wife and I got married with an honor guard of stormtroopers. I ran a Star Wars blog for years and contributed articles to other fan sites. This year, Spotify Wrapped put me in the top 0.1% of top John Williams listeners. Even with that lifelong fandom, I voted that my interest is fading fast. What Disney is putting out simply isn't Star Wars. If we're honest, it hasn't been ever since Rebels introduced more Jedi running around in the OT adjacent period and the god-awful Inquisitors. That was the first piece of Disney canon, and for the most part, it's only gotten worse since. Well, that's all I got for this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me how you feel about Star Wars these days. Are you as excited as ever, or do you just not really care anymore? Whatever the case may be, leave those comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, Thanks for watching.